Thank you, Joyjeet, for this very nice, kind words and so on. And also my age, tutor means automatically it elevated to a certain age.
I would just like to add one anecdotal background is that Prabir actually spent time in jail during emergency, which puts him in a very unique situation to comment on what the freedom of internet actually implies. So
I'm not going to take too much credit for that. Okay. So I would say that I must really stand between you and our desire to go back home. 7:30 almost approaching. We must have it enough. Plus the sub-zero temperature to which we are being subjected. I don't know whether it's a punishment for being classed as a politician. So freeze the hell out of them. But at the moment, I will say that one thing I must confess, that whether you like it or not, we are all politicians. Even if you abuse politicians, even that is politics. Because politics finally is what changes society. And if you say every politician is stupid and bad, then what you are saying is you will do nothing to change it. So I think it's important for us to understand whether we like it or not, whether we say it or not, we are in a certain kind of politics, even if it is a very negative one, which I think is there currently. What we need is a lot more positive politics, and I think that's important. I would just start with a small interjection about what Pradyut had said on the internet and how if BJP or the NDA had won in 2000X, they would have made a lot of changes. I would say one of the things he must also register is that Mr. Arun Shourie was the IT minister for some years, and the one contribution which he really did was signal disservice to internet was selling BSNL and essentially allowing that what was at that time the internet backbone of the country to go into private hands and effectively taking it out for the next 5 years. We now had to grow internet in different ways after that. So I think we will not go into the artifactuals or what might have happened if something else, if BJP had won or NDA had won. I think let's look at the larger picture today of what digital technology and internet is really doing to politics. And I think we have to accept that if we look at what technology does, it transforms societies in a very fundamental way, but it does it over time. It doesn't do it immediately. If you see printing press coming in, it didn't appear something very important. In fact, the first most important book that was published at that time was Gutenberg's Bible, as you all know. And the second most important book was at that time what was called the Hammer of the Witches, by which church identified witches and actually put them through witch trials and then burned them. So, you get very different impact what certainly was one of the most democratizing technologies ever, because you got mass literacy through the printing press. That's what finally it came about. But the change is not immediate. The change could even be retrogressive. You have, for instance, the start of the spinning jenny, textile machinery, which transforms the Industrial Revolution. Everybody knows about it. But it introduces slavery in the United States, in what today is United States, in the Americas, because you needed a lot more cotton than you had grown. And therefore, slave trade, getting from Africans to getting them as slaves to till the land in the Americas, then becomes something that happens. So you get very contradictory movements in technology as well, though in the long run, it does transform society. So you look at the television and radio, in fact, the mass communication medium in that sense, really mass communication medium, is films and radio, which came in the 20s and 30s. And a lot of people have attributed that, in fact, fascism grows in Germany and Italy because of radio and films. If you would know that Hitler was one of the people Nazi Germany was one of them, who understand the power of the cinema as a movement, as a medium, and then used it very effectively. Mussolini was supposed to have also used radio very effectively. So all these things today, you would also see was also liberating, because it also builds mass politics. The whole mass medium that you get, television, radio, brings about mass politics, just as an earlier age. Feudalism died when the printing press, when you got, for instance, the printing press, and the simple gunpowder and the gun meant the knights of the old who had this armor became completely superfluous. One little bullet and they were dead. So, this whole transformation that technology has brought us today, that we have internet, where for the first time, we have a means of communication which is not one-on-one, which is not broadcast one to many, but which is actually can build communities and groups on the internet, through the internet. So you have what is called multicast. So you can have small groups, you can have large groups. You have what is called the new thing, that's user-generated content. Every person today can have a radio or a television station using YouTube. It's available. You can have a blog, so you can start a quote-unquote newspaper. Of course, there are problems with this, but it has brought about a transformation that ownership of the media is no longer concentrated in only a few hands, and therefore the message which goes to the people is no longer possible to control, either by big business, corporate houses, or by governments. This is a transformation that has taken place, and this is there to stay. It is going to change society in very different ways. It's no longer possible to keep out news you did not want. Emergency, of course, as you know, we had information, actually complete information, which somebody talks about was WikiLeaks. Paraja was talking about it, as that you could get truckloads of information out of a single USB stick. Lady Gaga's, I think, CDs was what Bradley Manning used. So you have this enormous digitization of information. And then you have the internet, the ability to disseminate it. Anybody can broadcast on it in that sense. It's not possible to keep it out. And what happens is it's amplified by people. That once a certain thing happens, and people retweet it, people blog it, people connect to it in different ways, Facebook, of course, which I don't use, and so on and so forth. So the message gets amplified. The power of the people as communities can amplify a message in different ways, and that's going to change the political landscape in ways that we are not envisaging today. One thing is very sure, that it is no longer possible to keep out information completely out of our let me just put it off, because otherwise it's continuously ringing. So what is that? It's not possible to filter out information completely out of our landscape as it could be done earlier. So that is a big change that has come. Even the courts are not able to recognize this change. In the United Kingdom, for instance, they passed various orders by which they said even which company wants the information not to be disseminated should also not be put in public domain. This is a judgment of the British court. Finally, it was tweeted. It went all around. It was actually dumping wastes off the coast of Africa. And finally, the company which had taken out this kind of stoppage of information had to finally let go because it was all over the internet. So, of course, we have a much closer example, Mr. Singhvi. Now, what happens in all this is it's not possible to keep out information from public domain because today you cannot, even the courts cannot control the channels that exist. Mass communication is no longer restricted to few media companies, therefore even the courts cannot do it. Now the question is, of course, it has problems. It has problems because if you really look at fundamentally one thing, you have freedom of speech. You have restrictions which are called reasonable restrictions, pornography, child pornography, hate speech, and so on. But they are based on the laws of the land. Now, internet is cyberspace. Whose law operates? The United States does not recognize hate speech, does not recognize pornography as illegal. They have what is called child pornography. It's also still a problematic area even for the United States. But even there, the laws are very lax because they have what's called First Amendment, freedom of speech, hate speech is allowed. Most countries don't, including Europe. They don't allow hate speech. So therefore, whose laws will operate is a very significant issue. What we have to then work out, what is reasonable restriction on the internet and how do you impose it? I think what Paranja was talking about, I'm not going to go into that in detail, that the worst way of doing it is, of course, what Mr. Sibbal was trying to do. I'm talking of the IT minister, not personally. What he was trying to do is this internet rules that have been brought out, not the Internet Act. That gives a protection to the intermediaries of a certain kind, what is called safe harbor. Now, if I'm going to generate user-generated content, then YouTube is not liable for what I'm doing. That was the intermediary liability protection, which is a safe harbor which the IT Act gave. But the rules have been interpreted in a way, have put that in a way that in order to get the safe harbor, they will have to actually do censorship. And the censorship is absolutely blanket. It says offensive speech. Now, free speech means I have the right to offend you. You can go to be against court and sue me for libel. But you cannot say, I should not be offended. All speech should be only such which shouldn't offend me. Now, that's not freedom of speech. But the internet rules say, IT rules say, offensive speech is not okay. It also says blasphemy is not okay. In India, blasphemy is allowed. I, as born a Hindu, I'm an atheist, I can abuse my gods. That is allowed. It's not allowed in Pakistan, it's not allowed in a lot of other countries. But blasphemy is allowed in India. You cannot do hate speech. You cannot abuse somebody else's gods. Now that's hate speech. That I will also object to. But blasphemy is not allowed. So they've copied the rules, I think, from somewhere else, maybe from Pakistan. But having done that, we have got now something which is very, very, I would have to express in my language, please excuse me, very stupid. Now, if we want to, I think reasonable restriction is necessary. That reasonable restriction, how to do it, in what form to do, what should be the takedown, put back procedures, how we could be protected is something that we have to really work towards. Unfortunately, it appears now the issues as if it is between Facebook, Google and the government of India, which is not. Google and Facebook have no interest in you and me. They consider us as consumers to be sold to the advertisers. And only 1.01% concerns freedom of speech. 99.9% is entertainment and other stuff, which is what most people would see. That's what they're interested in. So they're not going to protect your and my freedom. So if we want politics on the internet, then we want freedom of speech. That is something a minority will have to fight. How we will do it, I don't know. But I'm quite sure that historically, whatever happens, you cannot stand in the path of history. The path of history is much more openness on information, much more freedom that will exist, weakening of privacy, unfortunately. It's bound to happen. Lot more snooping of the government, which we have to fight, but certainly privacy is something also going to come under threat. But our generation worried about privacy. We always said 1984, Big Brother is watching us. The current generation seems to say, why are people not watching us? That seems to be the Facebook phenomenon. So I think those things also we have to really we have to see how the things change. But technologically, I think we are in a different domain. Transformative technologies have come into existence. It will change the world. What it can also do is it can also create a whole range of new problems we haven't thought about, and that's something which we have to really work on. I'm sure everybody sitting here, active, inactive politicians as we are, all of us have to think about what is going to happen, because unless we intervene politically, and by intervening politically, it might even mean abusing politicians, unless you intervene politically, you are not going to change society. And I think what all of us are looking for, using this as an instrument, is also how to change society for the better. Thank you.